This is Jessica Anderson joining us. She is the Executive Director of Heritage Action for America, talking about their efforts in this campaign cycle in the lead up to midterms. Good morning.
Good morning.
We know about the Heritage Foundation. We have them here quite often. What's Heritage Action, though?
That's right. Heritage Action is the partner organization to the Heritage Foundation. We're a grassroots organization. We have 2 million activists all across the country, coast to coast, that are engaged on every single one of the conservative public policy issues. So we work on education, empowering parents. We work against spending. We want to limit the debt. We're interested in securing the border. We work on all of these issues, both at the state level and at the federal level.
What does the organization see itself as its role in this lead up to midterms?
Well, really, we're motivated mostly by our activists. You have to understand, voters across the country, conservative activists, they are frustrated with the direction this country is going. And so we can really harness that energy and then focus it on the election. So we have door knockers that are going door to door, talking about these issues in critical states like New Hampshire, like Nevada. And then Heritage Action this year made the strategic decision to actually spin off a third partner organization called the Sentinel Action Fund, which is a super PAC that can engage directly in elections, have independent spending, and support candidates. So we've endorsed Blake Masters in the Arizona Senate race, Herschel Walker in Georgia, Adam Laxalt, and again in Nevada. All three really important pickup opportunities when you look at the makeup of the United States Senate, and then we've got about 7 House races that we're involved in on the super PAC side, again with the goal of harnessing that grassroots energy and bringing it to bear for actual conservative fighters that hopefully will win, come here to Washington, and then get the job done on behalf of the American people.
When you look at a candidate to support, is it just their opportunity to pick up a seat, or is it parts of the individual themselves that you look at? And if that's the case, what are you looking for?
Yeah, we actually look at a number of different factors when making our endorsement decisions for the super PAC. One is, are they conservative? So do they have a view of policy that includes supporting individual freedom, strengthening the family, empowering people to flourish and have self-governance, letting businesses and schools remain open? I mean, these are the conservative issues right now that so many people are talking about and want to see a turnaround in our country. So that's the first and foremost thing we look at. Are they conservative? Second, are they willing to fight? Are they willing to actually go and engage on these issues? To come here to Washington, to not settle for business as usual or the status quo, but actually represent the people that came and brought them here. And so those are kind of the two main factors. And then, of course, what are our grassroots telling us? So we hear from the ground all the time that activists, they're supportive of Blake Masters. They want to see a change in Arizona. They don't like the direction of Senator Kelly and what he's done for the state. And so we really try to weigh all three things, their individual policy positions, their willingness to engage, and then what the grassroots feedback is on the ground.
What specifically about Blake Masters sets himself apart from Mark Kelly?
Oh, so many things. I mean, first and foremost, his stance on crime and actually providing safety and security to the neighborhoods all across Arizona. That's the number one issue, certainly in the state. You look at inflation, you look at the cost of goods in the state. Phoenix actually has the largest rates and peaks of inflation in the entire country. I mean, that is a driving issue for people. And then you look at the border. Mark Kelly has done nothing to secure the border. He's voted against border enforcement and security continuously. We have ads that show his exact voting record that are up right now in the state of Arizona. Blake Masters wants to do the exact opposite of that, secure the border and provide safety and security to neighborhoods across the state.
How do you do with candidates when you're looking at them? If some candidates make questioning the results of the election or saying that President Biden didn't win the election, or those, how do you factor those into your decision-making process?
Well, at the end of the day, we want it to be for elections to be easy to vote and hard to cheat. I mean, that has been the clarion call from the conservative movement over the last 2 years. And so we've been involved on election integrity bills from Georgia to Arizona to Texas to Oklahoma to South Carolina. I mean, there have been so many states that got into action to secure elections over the last 2 years at the state level, many of which were signed by governors. And so what we're looking at specifically is, are there election integrity laws that are in place in states across the country that make it easy to vote and hard to cheat? Part of that has to do, of course, with ensuring that there's poll workers and poll watchers that are actually in the voting areas and voting, whether it's a school or a gymnasium, wherever the facilities are, but that they're actually there and can follow the chain of custody of ballots and ensure no funny business happens. And so for us, that's really a litmus test. What is going on at the state level for election integrity, and how does that weigh then with what candidates have said? Are they going to continue to fight against H.R. 1, for instance, here in Washington? That is a vote that Mark Kelly has been forced to weigh in on. Does he or does he not support a federal overtake of our elections? That's a defining factor between him and Blake. Is
it just on the Senate level, or do you go as far as the governor's races in that for your organization?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The Senate Election Fund has not made any endorsements for governors at this point, but there's so much grassroots support behind Tudor Dixon in Michigan. Look at Kari Lake in Arizona, obviously Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida. And so our activists, our sentinels, they are on the ground already working on these governor's races, and we've really just provided the firepower on the House and Senate side through the Super PAC.
Jessica Anderson here for this conversation. If you want to ask her questions about her organization and what they're doing in this election lead up to Election Day, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and Independents, 202-748-8002. You can text us questions or comments at 202-748-8003. You talked about Georgia. What is it specifically about Herschel Walker that you're endorsing?
Well, Herschel Walker is an excellent candidate that's actually going to come to Washington and shake things up. And this is the exact sort of thing that the conservative movement is excited about right now. And when you look at Raphael Warnock's record and how he has basically voted carte blanche with the Biden administration, with Chuck Schumer, perfectly in line. He's done nothing in terms of independent thinking for the state of Georgia. We'd like to see a contrast. We'd like to see someone that is conservative, that cares about the issues, that's willing to put a great team around him and actually come here and get things done. And we think Herschel Walker will do that in a way. Obviously, he's got great star magnetism in the state of Georgia. People love him. So long as the Georgia Bulldogs keep winning, I think Herschel Walker is going to be in good shape.
How do you factor in the accusations of paying for a girlfriend's abortion and other things in these things? Does it factor into your decision making at all, or does it question it?
Absolutely. It's for him to answer. I mean, he did a great job, I think, within 24 hours of those accusations coming out, where he pled a case. He said, I found Jesus. I found the Lord. I've turned my life around. I'm sorry for what I've done before, and we're moving on. And, you know, grace saves a lot of that. And we look to the candidate to really be clear about their previous decisions, and it applies to everyone. Every single candidate should be clear about everything in their personal life that they may want to share or that comes out. That's on them. Our job is to go in and support the grassroots, and they tell us that they want to see a change, they want to see a turnaround, and we want to help on the issues that matter.
How many states specifically are you focusing on? How much money are you planning to spend?
So the Super PAC, the Sentinel Action Fund, will have spent between $13.5 to $14.5 million by the end of this. That's a large number for us. This is our first cycle that we've been involved. It was a strategic decision of Heritage Actions to spin this off. So it's a separate organization, but it's all within the goal of really advancing these conservative issues with the right team. You know, we can have the right policy, we can have the grassroots support, but then we have to have the right team here in Washington, in Congress, that's actually fighting for these issues day in and day out. So in a lot of ways, the election matters, but November 9th matters just as much, because then we've got to get to work on this legislative agenda and what the next 2 years are going to look like, hopefully ushering in a huge conservative turnaround. And I think a lot of us believe a great American renaissance after 2024.
Primary Senate races are you focusing on? So are you focusing on the House at all?
We have 7 House races that we have gotten involved in, 6 of which are flip districts, so districts that have the ability to move from blue to red. And then we've supported one incumbent, Representative Yvette Harrell, New Mexico, too. She's on the border. Incredibly important district when you look at border security, when you look at the energy jobs that are in the Albuquerque area in particular that are being really hit by Biden's lack of America First energy agenda and everything that's been hurting the job market in New Mexico. So really 6 great flip opportunities for conservatives, and then supporting Yvette.
Again, Jessica Anderson serves as the executive director for Heritage Action for America. Our first call for you is from Peter. Peter is in Montana. Democrats line for our guest. Peter, good morning. You're on with our guest. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, I have 3 questions. Number 1, who did you support in the Georgia Senate Republican primary race? Number 2, do you support a national abortion ban? And number 3, do you believe that the presidential election of 2020 was legitimately decided?
Great. Well, thank you for those questions. I think I got all three of them organized well. So first off, the Sentinel Action Fund did not get involved in the primary itself in Georgia. What we did is we wanted to have support for the grassroots activists that were going door to door and that they themselves were engaged on the issues and really trying to understand the difference between the candidates. Heritage Action also worked on some voter registration efforts in the state, which obviously helps every single candidate that's involved up and down the ballot in Georgia, including Governor Kemp. And so that's really been our focus in Georgia. And then we were able to turn up the heat once we got through the primary into the election. Into the general election. As far as your question on abortion, we firmly celebrated and were thrilled to see the Dobbs case come down this past year, which overturned Roe v. Wade and put the decision of abortion back to the state level. We think that this is an issue that the states have a ton of opportunity to protect life. You saw a number of states that ran into special sessions, including in Indiana, where they held a special session and tackled the issue of life almost immediately within 90 days of the Dobbs decision being handed down. My expectation is that number of states that don't already have laws in place that regulate against abortion and protect life, that those states are going to tackle this in 2023, and you're going to see everything from what you saw in Indiana, a full bill that supports life, to other things like encouraging a 24-hour waiting period, requiring ultrasounds, and then having actual holistic support for women's health care, where you can go in and provide options for adoption, family support. A lot of times women need help finding jobs or learning a skill or trade, and there's a really holistic approach, I think, that's being pursued at the state level to help on this issue. So we're thrilled that it's moving to the state level, and that's certainly something that we support. As far as the 2020 election, as I said earlier, we are firmly in the camp of supporting election integrity laws. We want it to be easy to vote and hard to cheat. We think that fraud does happen. It's been proven. Obviously, there's an ongoing debate about how widespread it is. But at the end of the day, what matters is those state election integrity laws that so many states have passed, and frankly, that they've passed for decades. This is not a new issue. I mean, you look at the state of Georgia, over the last 30 years, they've passed over 25 different election integrity bills. This is not new, and this is something that is only going to continue as the laws evolve to make sure that that election is secure.
Josephine in New Jersey, Independent Line. Hi. Good
morning. I am concerned about how you pointed out you raised between $13 to $14 million. That's a lot of money, which I have to conclude that you are being, how would I say, manipulated by people who are very wealthy, and their point of view is the only point of view. This all started with Citizens United, allowing people like you to come up and buy the election. That's not democracy. Democracy, my vote should count. And you're telling me it doesn't count. I got the money. We'll pay for everything. Thank you.
Thanks. Actually, I believe the exact opposite, which is that your vote does count. I mean, the truth of the matter is every single citizen across the country should engage. They need to vote. They need to turn out. They need to show up. They need to bring their family members, and they need to cast that all-important ballot when it comes to November 8th. There are so many issues that are at stake. And when you look at both federal races as well as state races, we mentioned some of the governors, but you also look at your state lawmakers. State lawmakers are an incredibly important part of our democracy, of our republic. And as more and more issues like abortion, like education, like securing the border actually evolve and turn back to the state level, those state lawmaker decisions are just as important. So I would encourage everybody to vote, get out and vote, make a plan. If you're bringing friends and family with you, make sure everybody's ready to go. If you're taking advantage of early voting, do that. As far as the support that's done from Heritage Action or our partner organization, the Sentinel Action Fund, which is an independent super PAC, our job really is to harness the grassroots. So we are fueled by those 2 million activists across the country that are engaged on these issues, that we're constantly talking to, engaging with, and frankly supported by. So I hear you. The most important thing is that you can get out and vote. Your vote does count.
One of the races that you're invested in is the Senate North Carolina race. Why is that?
Yes, we've actually been able to support Ted Budd. He's a congressman, has been fantastic in the House in his time with us there. He's a consistent conservative voter, and he's in the fight for his life for this Senate seat. He's going against a woman named Sherry Beasley, who is very soft on crime. We're up with an ad right now from the Super PAC that actually details and walks through the story of her time as a prosecutor and her role in really just opening the floodgates for crime to happen in the state of North Carolina. We think that's an issue that voters need to know about. Obviously, crime is a hugely important thing right now when you look at the polling and you look at the voter feedback in the state. And so we're thrilled to support Ted Budd, and we think he's got a real shot to win.
We'll show viewers the ad that you're running in that race.
Those pork chops deserve that, so I smoked them mother. That's what the killer said about my brother, State Trooper Ed Lowry. Shot him in cold blood.
Sherry Beasley's decision led to the killer escaping the death penalty.
She said the killer, quote, was a good person. I have to live with Sherry Beasley's decision every day of my life.
In a crime wave, we can't trust Sherry Beasley in Washington. Sentinel Action Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Jessica Anderson, that's one instance. Can you describe that story that the ad is based on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ad that you just saw shows the story of a brother, and he's heartbroken. I mean, he is literally telling a very vulnerable story that his brother was shot and killed. This instance happened in 1998, so it's been a few years now, and Sherry Beasley was defending the gentleman that killed his brother. And so when Ed Lowry, who you see in the ad, saw that Sherry Beasley was running and that she was running on a hard-on-crime policy platform, frankly, he wanted to speak out, and he wanted to tell the story that you see in the clips of who Sherry Beasley truly is, and put that front and center. I mean, those are her words, not his. And that's really important because people need to know the record of the people that they're supporting. And they need to have that information before they go into the ballot box on November 8th. And so what we did is we sat down, we interviewed him, and we let him tell a story about his brother and the heartache of the last 30 years and the direct role that Sherry Beasley had. And so consider that. If you're in North Carolina, consider that in the context of everything that she's saying about safety and security.
She did a recent candidate guide, a voter guide for the News and Observer there. And in her words, she was asked, what legislation would you support to make Americans safer? She says, as a judge and a chief justice, I spent over 2 decades partnering with law enforcement who hold violent offenders accountable and keep communities safe. In the Senate, I would start by fully funding the police so they have the resources they need to keep communities safe. We must invest in community violence intervention programs to stop the cycle of violence, and we need common sense gun safety reforms like cracking down on ghost guns, universal background checks, and strong red flag laws. Those are her words. How do they square with the ad that you just put out there, though?
They're her words today versus her words 20 years ago. I mean, and that is the decision for voters to make. Which Sherry Beasley do they believe?
Let's hear from LaJohn. This is a viewer in Jessup, Georgia. Democrats line. Hi, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Pedro. How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. You're on with our guest. Go ahead.
Miss Anderson, me and you must have two different Herschel Walkers in mind. The Herschel Walker I know played the Georgia Bulldog. The one you talking about, the family man, is that the same Herschel Walker that's got 4 children with 4 different women? Is that the family man you talking about? Or the Herschel Walker I know that can't string together 2 sentences? I'm almost 70 years old, and we consider Herschel Walker to be a joke now. People walk around laughing at him. And let me ask you this here. What do you think of Herschel Walker paying to have a woman have an abortion and then tell a lie about it? Thank you. I'll take your answer out there.
Thanks for your question. I think Herschel Walker has actually answered all of those questions really honestly, and that's for him to do, not for me. I don't know about his personal life. Only he can talk about that. And he's been very clear that he struggled with mental illness, that he struggled at a time, where his family was really not prioritized in the way that it should have. He said that, not me. And so I think for Georgia voters, they have a choice of how to move forward. Do they want someone in the United States Senate representing Georgia that's going to tackle these issues like empowering parents for school choice decisions, securing the border, stopping inflation, returning jobs, hopefully lowering the cost of gas. I mean, these are all the issues that are on the ballot, certainly in Georgia and across the country.
Let's hear from Monty, Spring, Texas, Independent Line.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I was wondering what the speaker's opinion is on paperless voting and the many states who for several decades used electronic voting that had paperless balloting, where the voter received no record of his or her vote. Now, to me, an organization that seems to be concerned about election integrity, this rings as a hollow farce. If you were concerned about election integrity, where was your outrage over this system that was implemented in many systems over many years in many elections? Absolute silence. I wonder if those were all conservative states. I wonder if elections produced the results that they needed up until the point that God sent us down Lord Trump to anoint all these people. Herschel Walker, a great example, until the Lord God sent us our King Trump to anoint everyone, and so that we didn't have to think anymore about their past 20 years ago, only the 20 years ago the other people that Trump wants us to think about, like the judge you just mentioned. 20 years ago, Herschel Walker, no thank you. 20 years ago, Jumpwell, that's the judge that we don't like. That's very important. I'll leave you to you, but mainly paperless voting. Where was the outrage?
Well, actually, the Heritage Foundation, which is Heritage Action's other partner organization, has been involved in the fight for election integrity for over 50 years. And if you look on Heritage website, you can see a whole host of resources, one of which is a election integrity scorecard, which actually goes through and grades states based on how secure their elections are. There are 23 different metrics that are in place. And one of those metrics is how they vote. Is it an all-by-mail state like Washington? Is it a mix of voting only with machines or paperless, as you describe? Or are there mail-in ballots in addition to day of election voting? And so depending on what state you're in, you can actually find that resource at heritage.org. You can click through state by state and see exactly what provisions are in place. And then you can maybe make a plan for activism. If you look at your state and you see, wow, we really need more security around drop boxes, or we need to look at and better understand why early voting is 60 days instead of 30 days or instead of 20 days. All of that information is available by state, and then you can make a plan to actually lobby your state lawmakers and get involved at the local level, because these changes are only going to be made through states. You have to really understand that state lawmakers hold the pen when it comes to election integrity, not the federal government.
When it comes to those activists you talk about and represent, what is the top issue for them? I know that abortion could be a key factor, the economy being a key factor, but what's top for them and what follows that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually describe it like an iceberg. So at the top of the iceberg for conservative activists, obviously, is this issue of the economy. The runaway spending, the out-of-control debt, the increased rise of inflation. Look at 7% interest rates. People trying to buy a home, they basically can't right now, right? That's the top of the iceberg. But underneath the iceberg are all these other issues like education, actually parents feeling like they are in control and have some form of transparency over their kids' education. Look at the border and the lack of security and enforcement, the fact that it's just been completely porous and not nearly enough resources to secure it. Look at issues like crime. We've talked about that already, safety and security, and wanting to feel safe in your neighborhood. You saw the New York governor's debate last night. That was a huge part of the discussion between the current governor and Zeldin, who's making, I think, a really good effort to highlight this issue, specifically on the New York subway. And so when you look at the iceberg, all of those issues matter, because the truth is the same person that's making the decision how to pay their bills is the same person in the family that's making the decision of where to send their kids or their grandkids to school. And these issues are all top of mind. And so I don't think you find many single issue voters in the way that we used to find as part of either the right or the left 20 years ago. Now all these issues they bend on top of each other. They build on top of each other, and it really makes it comprehensive, I think, for voters as they go into that ballot box and they're thinking about 6, 7 things that then makes them pull the trigger one way or the other.
You talk about those single issue issues. Do you think that to what degree the Roe decision at the Supreme Court and abortion plays into this cycle?
Well, I think Democrats and certainly the left wanted it to play a lot more than it actually is. I think you saw that in the polling over the summer where there's this immediate reaction where campaigns on the left, Democrats on the left, all they wanted to do was talk about Roe v. Wade. All they wanted to do was talk about abortion. But the truth is, and this is the beauty of the Dobbs decision, it's actually putting it back to the state level. And so the discussion now over whether or not life is protected is fully going to state capitals. It's going to governors. It's going to state lawmakers. And so that actually will change the tone and the temperature of activism around it. And I think that's why you see it fade in the federal polls as we get closer to November, because they realize that it's actually those state lawmakers that are going to weigh in on protecting life in a major way in 2023. On
our Republican line, this is Karen in Alabama. Hi.
Hey, good morning. So you literally just talked about what I was going to ask about, was the abortion issue. And I thought about this for years, and I thought if we could just get it out of the federal level, because it really belongs back at the states, well, now that's where it is. So now we need to stop talking about it. And when the Democrats bring it up to the Republican candidates, they can say, it's my personal choice. It doesn't matter. It goes to the state level. And the pro-life activists or the pro-choice people can focus on the different states. But if we could just get that out of the national debate, I think that would help Republicans, because people need to focus more. We need to focus more on the economy. We need to be able to buy food at a reasonable price and our gas at a reasonable price. And so that's what I was going to talk about. And you literally just probably answered my question. But thank you so much.
Karen, thanks. I mean, the only thing I would add is that Democrats on the left actually are continuing to talk about this because they support federal no limits and actually having full-term abortion. And that sort of extremism that you see at the federal level, I think ends up generating a lot of discussion throughout the country, because Democrats want to have a full protection for abortion up until the point of birth. And that's why you've seen McCarthy, Scalise, others in the House that have come out with this bill called the Born Alive Infant Protections Act. They want to put that on the floor. If Republicans take back the majority, that'll be part of the floor the first 30 days of the new Congress, which protects a baby after they've been born from a botched abortion, that they would then be resuscitated and brought back to life.
In Illinois, Democrats line, Stephen, hi.
I guess I can continue on the abortion thing, even though I had others, but you say give it back to the states. How about just give it back to the women? Instead of putting restrictions on abortion, you put restrictions on women. Let them each decide on their own what they want to do with their pregnancies and get, well, men and the politicians out of it. Secondly, you talk about conservative values being freedom and families, but what about those families of trans and gay kids in Florida, Oklahoma, and Texas who are now being criminalized by these crazy right-wing governors because, well, it's an easy point for them to pick up because there's such a minority of trans kids out there. You are the party that's banning and burning books. You talk about freedom, but once again, that's just a catchphrase for you because it's just enough freedom for you. My definition of the conservatives is they want the continuation of the status quo because it's working for them. So why would they risk anything to help anybody else? Talk to you later.
Well, first off, conservatives are not burning books. What we have done, and what I think is the right thing, is to empower parents to be involved in their kids' education. That is not a bad thing. We want families to stay intact, and we want parents to feel like they have some form of transparency over their kids' school. They should be able to know what their kids are learning. They drop them off at 8:30 or 9:30 every single day. They're in the hands of teachers. They're molding our young minds. This is why the role of a teacher is so important to the bedrock of the next generation. And so when you look at what states have done to empower parents, that's a good thing. It's a good thing for our American culture. And I would even take it a step further, and this is something that we learned from the COVID lockdown when so many schools were actually locked down because of the COVID rules and regulations, where you actually had parents saying, wow, I don't like what my kid is learning. I want to put them somewhere else, but their state didn't have school choice. And so all of this is, I think, really pushing us as a country to consider, what does universal school choice look like in every single state? How do we ensure that the money follows the student, not the bureaucracy? So that way, when we're in a situation where we need to pick up our kids and move them from one school to the other, regardless of socioeconomic background, regardless of demographic background, that you actually have the ability to do it. So if your kid is best in a public school, great. If they'll be better in a parochial school or a private school, great. Charter school, great. Let's give parents the ability to move those resources around and actually allow the funds to follow the student and give more options, more opportunity for families, and specifically for students. I mean, you saw the scores that have come out just this last week of how behind this next generation of kids is. I mean, that should alarm us all, and we should seriously reconsider what universal school choice looks like in every single state across the country.
This is Alan in Arizona, Republican line for our guest. Go ahead.
Good morning. Excellent spokesman. Thank you so much for being on. My thoughts are basically these are the words that you've never heard from any politician running for Congress. I'm running for Congress to lower the cost of living for every American. And the reason I mention that is when you look at Trump when he did the Space Force, they appropriated about $14 billion. Biden came back behind and wanted $773 billion for the department. As far as I'm concerned, 287 departments or 288 departments is a waste of money. We need to put states' rights up front and eliminate these departments by at least 50% in the next 25 years. It's just a money pit, and it's never going to stop. Every American knows we're spending ourselves into the ground. It's just unbelievable the trillions of dollars we're in debt for. And there is a way to get out of it, and it's through oil. And by us selling more oil across the world, we can reduce our trillions of dollars of debt. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I really appreciate C-SPAN.
Alan in Arizona, thank you.
Alan, I mean, I think those are really great points. When you look at the rate of spending and debt that this country has, I mean, this is a huge crisis. It's a generational crisis. If Washington's going to get serious, yes, we have to unleash American energy. We have to roll back everything that the Biden administration has done to cripple the energy sector here in the United States. That has to be something that a new, potentially new Republican majority can tackle, but also in 2024, a new Republican president can tackle that and roll all of that back. When you talk about spending and you look at what the Biden administration just did with the Build Back Broke bill, that was a tax and spending bill from over the summer, and what those rates are going to mean for middle-class families and for families all across the country when it comes time for our taxes, quarter one of 2023, we're all going to feel that, every single one of us. It's not just businesses, it's us as individuals as well. You know, you talk a lot about inflation. I mean, this is obviously an issue that is top of mind for voters. It's top of mind for every single one of us as we look at the price of goods and how much they have risen over the last 18 months. And we did some research at the Heritage Foundation, which actually quantified that individuals are $4,500 less rich, so less money in our pocket because of the rate and the increase of inflation over the last 15 to 18 months. Those are things that all of us on the conservative side, we want to turn around. Cutting spending shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be an American issue, something that every single one of us tackle and really get right over the next 2, 4, 6 years. So thanks for the question.
Sorry about that. If the House takes power, what would you like to see them do moving forward, particularly working with the Democratic White House and possibly a Democratic Senate?
Yeah, there's actually a whole host of issues. We think there's 7 main issues that the new Congress can tackle. One of them is on this issue of debt and spending and actually balancing the budget and looking serious at our spending rate over the next 2 decades. We talked a lot about education. That's our #1 priority when you look at empowering parents and providing universal school choice across the country. We obviously want to see the border secured. We think that's something they can tackle immediately. You look at the rise and the influence of China. That's another issue. You're already seeing a China task force come together on the right, led by Congressman Jim Banks, that's actually putting together what does it look like to detangle the Chinese Communist Party influence here in the United States so that we have a China-resistant economy. I mean, that is not an easy task. It's not something that will be done quickly, but it has to be done studiously if we're ever going to get China out of our day-to-day life here. And that is going to mean that each of us are going to pay a little bit more for our goods. And so how do you have that on the backdrop of this huge rise and increase in inflation that is just driving the cost of goods up? So we have to balance all of these equities. I think that a new Republican majority will do this well. And most of all, they're going to have this conversation in front of the American people. And that sort of transparency, it just makes America so much greater when you know exactly what your elected officials are talking about, what they're voting on, that we're not voting on these big bills in less than 6 hours that no one has had time to read. I mean, these are the things that have to change. So those three issues, I think, will be top of mind. I also think that the new Republican Congress is going to tackle big tech, look at the influence of the big tech giants that they have in our daily lives, whether or not they can roll some of that back and provide protections to all of us that are using social media to talk as we would here today or in the public square. I mean, those things have really changed and evolved through the years. And then the last thing I think you're going to see, and honestly, I think we're going to see it in the first 30 days of a new Republican Congress, is actual oversight. So bringing in bringing in Biden's cabinet secretaries, specifically Mayorkas, and looking at his role and the complete lack of ownership and security for the border, having investigations, using that oversight and accountability tool that the House needs to use more of, and they're going to do it in a pretty fierce way.
Do you think you're going to see impeachment on the House side if the Republicans take power? I
do. I think impeachment is certainly on the table when you look at some of Biden's cabinet secretaries and how delinquent they've been with their roles and responsibilities. I think that's going to be something that McCarthy, as well as the oversight chairs, are really going to grapple with within the first 30 to 60 days of a new Congress.
Let's hear from Ed. Ed is from Columbia Station, Ohio, Republican line. Hi, Ed. Go ahead. You're on with our guest.
Good morning. She's fantastic. Right now, the way if you didn't put no one knew in this country who was running this country, the House, the Senate, and presidency, all levers of power. Nobody knew if it was Republicans or Democrats. This whole country, 100% almost, would be screaming. Well, probably 80%. Was screaming, every one of them replaced, and impeachments, open borders, or the guy running that. That's treason in this country. 100-some thousand deaths, and it's more than that per year of just fentanyl. It's coming through like the sieve. The over 2.5 million that we know, terrorists, everything's coming in. Just this whole country. But what I'm getting at, the conservatives, we're fighting the media gives a complete pass to this administration from day one he was sworn in to this second. He blatantly lies. It's not he's just old and senile and decrepit. I mean, the guy, okay, our president, my commander-in-chief, and I spent many years, and I still give my life, he's my president, of course. It's sad. It's pathetic. He says, like an example, the other day, he goes many times, this blatant lie in the media, where the press is all there, and they don't ask. He goes, well, on the college giving them pay back to college, giving them paying off their loans, which we're paying for, every taxpayer, people on welfare, Social Security, welfare. He says, well, I signed and got it back through with 2 extra votes. There was no vote. That was executive order. Nobody calls them out. We fight them every day from the media, the big Google tech. They're shut down. Even the donors can't even give the Republican Party. They shut them down on the internet.
Okay, caller, you put a lot out there for the guests to consider. So, Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, a couple things in there. One, I think this really makes my point, the caller does, which is that there are so many issues that are on the ballot. There's so much that people are concerned with that they want to see turned around. And they want a different direction for our country. And we want to have faith that things are going to get better when you look at our schools, when you look at our economy, when you look at our communities and whether or not they're safe and secure. So, my point of the iceberg earlier, you made it so well, which is that there are so many issues that are swirling around. Onto this issue of student loans, this is actually a really important conversation to have because President Biden did say that he put it for a vote, and he did not. It was an executive order. It was something that he signed, and now there's a big question on whether this goes to the courts and whether or not the Biden administration actually has the authority to forgive student loans in the way that he has proposed. And so I think you're going to actually see a national discussion about this over the next 6 months, especially when you look at those people that worked really hard, like I did, to pay off my college fees so that way I could end school debt-free. Well, what about the people that worked 5 jobs over the course of their entire college career and first 10 years in the workforce? What happens to them? And so this idea that government can just go in and pick winners and losers based on kind of the sentiment of the day or a voting group that they want to buy off, I mean, it's just un-American. And I think this conversation on student loan forgiveness, it rises to that occasion, and whether that's the right role, I don't think it is. We at Heritage Action we're opposed to it. And this is why this conversation about school choice and getting education out of the federal bureaucracy and back to the states is really top of mind, I think, for a lot of people heading to November 8th.
Washington,
so, thank you.
In Washington, D.C., Deba on our independent line. Hi. Hi, you're on. Go ahead.
Good morning, Pedro. My question is, do you have any Republican candidates that you wouldn't endorse? That's my first question. And my second question is, would you support Liz Cheney if she runs next year?
Well, the Sentinel Action Fund, which is Heritage Action's independent partner organization, it's a super PAC, has gone in and endorsed a number of Republicans, Ted Budd in North Carolina, Blake Masters in Arizona, Adam Laxalt in Nevada, all running for the United States Senate, as well as incumbent Representative Yvette Harrell in New Mexico, too, also running for her House seat, and then a number of opportunities for Republicans to take back Democrat seats when you look at the map across the country. And so I think all of those races are certainly important. You know, there are 4 races that are pickup opportunities for the right, for the GOP, and that's Georgia, it's Nevada, it's Arizona, and it's New Hampshire. Those 4 states are the pickup opportunities. And if the GOP can pick up 2 or 1 or 2 or 3 of those seats, then we're looking at a Senate that's 51, 52, 53 on the GOP side. But they also have to hold the other side of the ballot. And that's why you see so much attention going on in Pennsylvania. Obviously, Dr. Oz and Fetterman had their debate last night. The voters in Pennsylvania got to see firsthand exactly the 2 choices that are on display for November 8th. A lot of attention in Pennsylvania. Ohio, same thing, a state that the GOP has to hold. Wisconsin, same thing, a state that the GOP has to hold with Senator Ron Johnson. And then finally, North Carolina, a little bit of a different situation because you have a new candidate running in Ted Budd against Sherry Beasley, and we've talked about that. But that's a hold seat taking over Senator Richard Burr's seat as he has retired.
To what degree are you supporting or putting money into the Pennsylvania Senate race?
So Heritage Action Sentinels have been on the ground in a really significant way throughout Pennsylvania. It's been one of our best states over the last decade that we've been involved, and they're going door to door. They're talking to voters about these issues. They've held events in Altoona and Bethlehem and Pittsburgh. I mean, there's so much energy that exists to turn around. And obviously there's a governor's race there. We haven't even talked about that in Pennsylvania. I mean, the fact that we have so many races on the ballot, governors, Senate, House races, state lawmakers. I mean, it's really going to be a really big day on November 8th.
Barrington in Washington, D.C., Democrats line. Go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, America.
Good morning.
The USA is under siege by the Republican representative. We need to vote democratically this election. Thanks.
Thanks for that. I think everyone should go out and vote. I've said this. I think that we have a huge opportunity to vote on the issues that we care about on November 8th and then see what direction this country is going to go over the next 2 years.
From our independent line, Elise in Springfield, Virginia. Hi.
Hi there. Pedro, I would really appreciate it if you could give me a minute because I, like John Fetterman, have lived with the disability after a stroke. So speaking sometimes gets a little hard. I would like to address some things that Jessica actually mentioned, and I think this is something that you see a lot in the, in quotes, conservative factions. One thing is I am a registered nurse. I worked in obstetrics, and I know about abortion, and I also know about it as far as saving lives, and I'm talking about the child that gets pregnant, that is raped by a family member. There are no abortions done at term as a person is in labor. Let's get that clear. This is a propaganda that is put out there, and it is completely inaccurate. I am very tired of seeing this get bandied around, and it's not true. It is absolutely not true. And I think that it does a disservice to those children and women who face a crisis in pregnancy. And like Rick Santorum and his wife, who had an abortion at 19 weeks because her kidneys were failing. She needed that abortion, otherwise she would have died. Now, I don't know if you don't have a problem with that, but I do have a problem with people who promote death of increased mortality in women and children who get pregnant. You mentioned something about the border, and you can't get funding. We can't get funding for enough border agents to patrol and do the work that needs to be done. I have been in this town for years, and I can tell you the Republicans have fought tooth and nail, along with the Heritage Foundation and the Chamber of Commerce, against E-Verify. As far as school control, in Fairfax County, parents are encouraged and actively encouraged to review the materials that their children are given. They are encouraged to participate in their children's school learning.
Elise, we'll stop you there because you put 3 points on the table, so we'll let our guests respond in the time left.
Yeah, thanks for your questions. I mean, at the end of the day, what we want to see is that activists actually engage on every single one of these issues. And so when you look at what is needed to secure the border, it is a matter of funding, but it's also a matter of allowing law enforcement to do the job that they're meant to do. And Mayorkas, under the direction of the Biden administration, is pulling back Border Patrol agents from actually doing that. I mean, Mark Morgan tells these stories great. When you look at enforcement, just simply let people do their job. Let them provide safety and security, especially for those border towns. Let's have some humanity for people that are crossing the border illegally. If they're actually seeking asylum, let's ensure that they have a judge that's actually funded in a judicial system at the border that can actually hear their cries and send them to the right place for those things to be fixed. And so at the end of the day, what we want to see is that the border is secure, but that law enforcement is allowed to do their job, and that includes the Border Patrol and the valiant men and women that are trying to keep our country safe. The example that you gave of Fairfax County, the only reason that parents now in Virginia have a voice in their kids' school is because of Governor Glenn Youngkin, because he campaigned on empowering parents. And then his first 60 days as governor, he ushered through dozens of executive orders, bills, statements, comments, all things that would better empower parents to take back the reins of their kids' education. He won on that issue. He is governing on that issue. And that sort of mandate, I think, is exactly what conservatives and, frankly, all Americans are looking for with this next Congress. I mean, we talked about this, what role and what policy issues should the next Congress tackle? Well, they're going to have a mandate from the American people to get serious about the border, about inflation, about crime, about spending, about education. This is all going to be top of mind as there's a potential new wave that comes here to Washington after November 8th.
The website for the organization is heritageaction.com. Jessica Anderson serves as their executive director. And thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me.